Film noir does not possess the hard tonalities of absolute moral blacks and whites, but rather the myriad spectrum of infinite and uncertain shades of gray. These films forge the convoluted labyrinth of character and circumstance, exploring the opaque regions of ethical ambiguity within the protagonist and those that surround him. It is a hinterland of sinister shadows and displaced light, a clever repartee and shifting realities. One is lucky to come out on the other end alive. Yet we are here to speak about it tonight, and I must apologize for that obtrusive assault. Here is our actual host, Gabe Van Handel.
Hello, thank you, and welcome to our Film Noir show with Mark Borchardt.
And Zav LaPlay, my
And
man.
Zav LaPlay, who is in the middle of a hinterland of technical problems, but we are bringing this show to you, and we figured it out. You have no idea how many wires, how many mazes, how many labyrinths of technology we had to go through to bring you this. It's like a film noir film in here that we had to go through to make this happen, but it is happening, and it's coming to you. For those of you out there who are maybe less familiar with film noir, or maybe have seen film noir and are familiar with it, but can't quite come to a conclusion in your mind, there is no conclusion. We still haven't found a conclusion. Even people who have written books on film noir haven't decided on a proper final conclusion. But here's a basic outline for what film noir might be, according to a few people. The visual style of it is stark light and dark contrasts, shadowing, black and white, lots of Venetian blind shadows, low angles, wide angles. There's a lot of disorientation. People in mirrors and mazes. There's bizarre, surreal perspective special effects, foggy glass angles and lighting, and shot through very, very strange filters. Lots of on-location shooting. There's a lot of exaggeration and emphasis on the symbolic traits and characters and plots as emphasized by those special effects or means of composition and framing and shooting. Structure and narrative is a lot of the times told in flashbacks, convoluted storylines, voiceovers, narrations. Crime and murder is usually an element. Greed, jealousy, sometimes a criminal investigation, sometimes an ordinary person conducting an investigation. Protagonists are implicated in heists, cons, murder conspiracies, often involving adultery, affairs, betrayals, double crosses. Heroes are flawed, morally questionable, alienated, existentially bitter. There are some archetypical characters, which strangely enough are not always found in a lot of the most famous or even favored film noirs. The hard-boiled detective, the femme fatale, and the corrupt police officer, the jealous husband, the down-and-out writer. Lots of cigarette smoke is always readily available, though. Oftentimes in a city, LA, San Francisco, New York, and Chicago in particular. City is oftentimes symbolic as a labyrinth of the human mind and the human soul. Bars, clubs, lounges, climaxes often in visually complex industrial settings like factories, train yards, and as always, it rains. Essentially pessimistic, people are always trapped in unwanted situations against fate, doomed in a corrupt world of anxiety and alienation.
My God, Gabe, rambunctious yet eloquent, and you really, thank you, Gabe, that was beautiful.
Thank you, Mark, for your beautiful Byzantine opening.
Yeah,
as well.
and I just want to, I think I said instead of in one of those sentences, so it may have came off a little cantankerous, and I
think we'll
apologize for that.
So here's our film noir show. So where are we going to begin, Mark? You're the man that we called for this job.
Well,
we brought on board.
Well, in a thousand thanks. It's a great way to spend a Friday evening. I think one of the things that we determined was kind of to keep the idea of film noir crystallized to the 40s and 50s, and also to the realm of the detective, because you know, the tentacles of noir can be they can reach back to German Expressionism of the 20s. They can reach further ahead to the political intrigue of the 70s, you know, and so forth. So I think, you know, we would have an endless show if we did not somehow contain it. So I think we agreed to do the 40s and 50s kind of.
You could say it could reach forward to films in the future, even.
Yeah.
Today and tomorrow, right?
Well, sure.
Even, like anime films and all kinds of stuff.
You can literally almost say that every crime film that comes out nowadays, or almost every action film, literally has some sort of influence or some sort of pedigree launched, and some sort of arm or finger or hand put somewhere in the film noir handbook that there's some sort of influence, there's some sort of reach, there's some finger in the cookie jar that has been touched upon by the influence of not only film noir but neo-noir, which are films that are revamps or films that are film noirs put in different settings, in different contexts, shot in different ways. Such as the 70s noirs that we were just talking about, like The Parallax View and other political thrillers. The Conversation and other political thrillers, which
Parallax View, and we got one other, 3 Days of the Condor.
Yeah. And you could even say that there's other films which would not be considered film noir by a lot of people, but a film like A History of Violence, which is shot in daylight, which has an unusual, which has against type situations, but which has a main character pitted against fate in an unwanted situation, and it's a crime story with a lot of sexual overtones and a femme fatale who happens to be a loving and caring wife. So you could literally say that this genre has done a lot for cinema. I mean, this is just a huge
And I
genre.
would say it's also one of the most cliche at this point, expressions of cinema itself. So if someone was to say, if you were to have a contest and everyone make a 24-hour film, I bet you'd have a bunch of noir spoofs or what do you call it? Like, people trying to do pseudo-noir type of stuff. So it's gotten to the point where it's almost like the cowboy film in terms of being just like a cliche of movie making at this point.
And thank you, Zav. I think that is beautiful what you said. And I want to touch upon why potentially, possibly, that noir exists. Is I think early in the early days of cinema, obviously it's a fresh medium and so forth, and anything that's on the screen, it's a willing subject. But noir is kind of like an evolution of the idea of film, because in the beginning you have very concrete good guys and bad guys in these very specific situations and so forth. And what noir is kind of like the natural evolution of kind of humanity, because we're no longer the farmer, we're in the city, we become far more psychologically complex, we deal with far more people, and we have far more shifting plates of thoughts and behavior. Noir began to reflect that, because I think earlier, prior to noir, you had a good person who made a mistake, who in the 20s and 30s and so forth, they had a lot of those anti-drug films, anti-prostitution films and so forth. It's a good person that makes the mistake of going into this particular world and then is redeemed at the end. But with noir, we begin to accept that this is who the protagonist actually is, flawed, actually has these 1,000 shades of gray, and it's not going to be redeemed. That's who that person is. And noir, and that's what some people call cynicism, but no, that's who we are as humans with this vast spectrum. And noir begins to reflect that. Now it becomes a little bit problematic because you have censorship, and it's very hard to allow this ambiguity to continue after the film ends, because we, censorship-wise, want that wrapped up. We want a good person to fall back to goodness, and noir sometimes does not allow it. So it actually transcends these ideas of moral censorship, like with the Hayes office. They would go through the scripts, and is there a moral coda at the end and so forth. And noir possibly,
the bad guy cannot win.
Possibly begins to pester that notion of the absolute moral conclusion.
Would you say that the anti-hero, that noir was some of the first times where you started seeing an anti-hero?
Possibly, because that's a complex notion, and maybe the silent cinema couldn't handle that. It wouldn't. Why it would be too complicated. Again, this is all theoretical. I don't know what kind of looks you're giving me, Gabe.
No, I'm interested.
Oh, okay.
I'm interested. I'm just perplexed.
It's a very ambiguous look of interest.
That's the look of a good interviewer right there.
Yeah.
Although Zav LaPlay might have me beat with the ever perplexed look, and the ever interested, ever confounded, ever confrontational, and ever ready look. And plus Zav's glasses distort his eyes a little bit, so I can't tell what's really going on in there. I like it.
They are incredibly hip.
It's a good thing.
I wanted to just say something. I know we don't want to go too far afield with this, but it's also an interesting, noir it's not an American term, and yet noir cinema is the height of Americana in a sense. It's interesting that it was a European coining of a genre.
Yeah.
In terms of film criticism, of course, noir was invented before it was coined. And I think, Gabe, you were saying it used to be called crime drama or something.
It was in the beginning referred to, for the most part, when it was referenced in like the Hollywood Reporter or Variety, or if you read a film review or a film synopsis, it was just it was a crime drama or a crime melodrama. Yeah, just melodramas in their time, and a Hollywood crime drama. But oftentimes they were separated because there were like sexual motivators, cynical attitudes. And it wasn't until Nino Frank in 1946 put the term on it officially. In the 70s, thank God for weed-smoking college students
that's amazing to me. So noir was only coined as noir in the 70s.
In 46, and then it wasn't...
Oh, in 46.
In 46 by Nino Frank, who's a film critic.
That makes more sense.
And then in the 70s was when it sort of was rediscovered, when we sort of Gettysburg addressed it, when we sort of realized, oh my God, there's something to this stuff, and there's something to these writings about it.
It's a type.
Exactly. There's something more to this. Like what happened with Citizen Kane, how that was really sort of rediscovered later. Vertigo, rediscovered later. Film noir, rediscovered later, when that cinema, besides, I mean, cinephiles were in love with this stuff, but they had to dig deep. They had exposure. They didn't have DVD, torrents on the internet. They didn't have all this, this overabundance, this overindulgence, this pathetic ease of access to everything. They had to dig for what they found interesting. They had to fight for what they wanted to watch, and then through their passionate writings, through their insistence that no, damn it, this stuff is really important, and this is a different breed of cinema, the focus was then re-put on it and re-examined. So when movies like Out of the Past were made, these were not films that were lauded in their time as being like the most, as amazing pieces of cinema, of film noir. These were just good melodramas at best, but these were not movies that were lauded as some of the best screenplays ever written, and these highly emotional, highly original films until later. Samuel Fuller was a filmmaker who was basically overlooked and overshadowed and considered sort of a genius in his own right of filmmaking, but his work was just sort of looked at, well, that guy's just crazy, and his work is kind of one-dimensional. And later on, when it was re-examined later on in life, when he was really at the age of 80, when he was making movies like White Dog, and when he was making other things, his other movies like Underworld USA and
Shock Corridor,
Pick Up on South Street were sort of looked back at as and these B films, which is essentially what in their time a lot of these noirs were looked at, and they were allowed to thrive with having sometimes the bad guy win, or sometimes having the good person do bad things and get away with it by the end of the film, was because these films were B pictures. They were second run pictures, and a lot of times either A, they weren't run before the board, and in some cases, they weren't run before the board, and if they were, sometimes they were like, well, who's going to see this movie? Who cares? And there's no boobies being shown on the screen, and there's no children being killed, so we'll let it go. And thank God for it, because some of these films existing under some of the censorship allows for a greater structure, sometimes a greater depth of storytelling and a greater depth of dialogue, rather than just showing some people having sex or someone getting shot in the head.
My God, Gabe, thank you. But I think what Zav was saying, and I'm just taking a guess here, is that most likely in the 60s with the Caillou Cinema crowd, or late 50s, is that they're the ones who identified noir as being
That's
noir.
what I would have guessed.
Yes,
I would have guessed that it would have been Godard and the Caillou Cinema people who sort of realized that they started to appreciate it artistically.
In their movies, too,
Yeah, and they did the same thing with Hitchcock, who was also considered to be kind of just a B movie type of director. Yeah.
Well, yes.
Melodrama director. Yeah.
No, he was not a melodrama director, but he was considered. His movies were considered not to be taken seriously.
That's true.
Whoa, wait a second. Rebecca won Best Picture for 40. That's Hitchcock, dude.
Oh, really?
That was in his English period, though.
No, because he's Selznick. He's an American.
That was
at this
the first
point.
year.
So when you went, that's a very classy film. So I maybe prior in England, he could have been. Wait a second, dude.
I think he was a pretty well established
dude. He was A.
He was an A-list. He's an A-list
I don't think he never had trouble, except for Psycho, getting a budget or anything like that.
Okay.
I would have to disagree with that one.
I would have to.
Well, that's something I didn't make that up. I remember learning that early, and maybe I'd have to find the source.
He wasn't prestigious, I guess. He was
maybe it would be a little bit
director.
like taking Spielberg seriously.
Yes.
He's a A-list director, but is he an art?
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Dude, I can see the slip up with Hitchcock begin and continue from Psycho to The Birds. Those two films, I could understand where somebody says B just to take a stab at him. I could understand that, but you cannot say that about Vertigo or Rear Window or anything like that, which is just an A-list film.
Right.
But I can understand where that's.
I guess the A-B thing doesn't really apply as much as what is to be considered serious art cinema. Cinema that's like on the level of
in its time. In its time,
right?
Exactly.
Right.
Rear Window is a film that has come to be appreciated as the true film of film watching, of the idea of the audience being a character in the film.
The voyeur.
The voyeur.
Brian De Palma played that to the hilt in homage.
Of us being the character, of the fourth wall sort of being broken down and non-existent by us entering the film and the film entering us. But in its time, it was a really, really stylized piece of entertainment. And then sort of as it was examined over time, Godard with Breathless, which sort of poked fun at the idea of the noir genre, which sort of took it as its own, which created like the noir film idea as its own character and sort of the Brando character, and did really, really amazing things with it. Shoot the Piano Player with Truffaut as well. I mean, these were film critics who took American cinema real seriously, and they were just disgusted with French cinema at the time. They just were like, listen, this stuff has to go. I mean, in the film, All the Boys Are Named Patrick, Godard's first short film that he made, there's a headline on a newspaper that said, French cinema accepts complete and utter defeat and dismissal of itself. And so they just decided that, man, these underrated American directors, this is where it's at. This is where it's happening. And a lot of this stuff, Samuel Fuller,
Howard Hawks,
Edgar G. Ulmer, who was considered a B director in the States, but over there considered a god. Also, another director, Joseph H. Lewis, who to this day still is criminally underregarded, who directed a great film I physically pushed into Mark's direction, called The Big Combo, which is my personal favorite noir. But if you look at it, the production values on it are kind of laughable, but it's just gorgeous. It's in terms of intention, style, and artistry, it's just I think it's unmatched.
Right, but see, that works in its advantage. That kind of more like the cheap technical aspect of it brings out far more contrast, and with good cinematography, it's a very subtle lighting. You're not, it's very mature. And what he's referring to, like in The Big Combo, it's very hard blacks and whites, but that actually lends to the effect of noir. So I mean, it comes back on itself and works. Sort
of like how lo-fi rock, with a lot of the dirtiness, like if you listen, like a band like Sonic Youth, if you would have recorded all that with like, if you hadn't had some dirtiness, some graininess, and not recorded it on tape, I mean, there's a lot of the sound that literally is it's some of the most epitomal rock music that's ever been recorded, and it's post-punk, it's punk, and it's also proto-punk, but without that element of filthiness, of dirtiness, of destruction, you literally lose that danger, that edge that was so important, especially in the late 80s when rock music was sort of redefining itself. And I think in the 50s, which is sometimes considered a period of it mistakenly looked at as this clean period in the American dream, when in fact there's a lot of demons lurking underneath the surface. There's a lot of Red Scare paranoia. There's this post-World War II misanthropy of the self and of culture, and sort of this this want to get away from the Holocaust, this want to get away from the Depression, this want to just let things be. And a lot of alcoholism as well. And with that, and with a lot of these hidden sexuals and these personal demons, come a lot of comes a lot of brutality that comes out in cinema, which is the art of the people in a lot of different ways.
You know, it's the advent of Playboy magazine. It's the spreading of the suburbs. It's now when he talks about alcoholism, you know, that's the barbecues, the weekend barbecues. These guys are making cars in Detroit. They're getting good money, man. They got pensions and they got wives and they're getting. Bringing children into the world, and all their buddies are being gathered for these barbecues and so forth. So you're starting to encounter that. You're starting to encounter the good life in America, and what he's saying there's an underbelly to it, which is like McCarthyism, the Red Scare, and that actually concludes.
And people coming back from World War II. And
disillusioned because their wives have cheated on them. They are searching for jobs. Some of them are psychologically distressed. Yeah, you know, so there is the not so glamorous after effect of the war that they have to now integrate themselves back into society. This concludes with Kiss Me Deadly in the mid-50s, where and now we haven't even why the hell haven't we been talking about films yet?
Okay.
No,
You're
right. No, but I mean, come on, because the Maltese, the Maltese. Because now, this is a
Let's
trip.
get into it. Let's get into it. Film noir, by the way, is about movies. In case we've gotten so far off subject.
No, but it is about what we have discussed because films are the end result of this.
In a sense, what we're doing is we're dealing with such a massive genre of cinema that in a way we're kind of approaching it from many angles and just kind of approaching this very this big, huge universe of cinema. And it's hard to talk just specifically about one film or the plot of a film.
If you just joining
we will get there. Can I just interject one more? Again, on the edges, the periphery of what this is called film noir. What about I think about the artwork of Edward Hopper, for example, as having a kind of a noir quality, and then in terms of literature, who are some of the writers that what is? I mean, it comes a little bit out of like paperback novels.
Three main writers.
Yeah, he's talking about Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler, James M. Cain. Who else are you going to say? Mickey Spillane?
Those are the three main ones. But the
you
major
knocked over a stand for that.
The major ones would be for Dashiell Hammett would be
Maltese Falcon
and The Glass Key. For Herman M. Cain,
James M. Cain.
The books.
Postman always rings twice.
Mildred Pierce and Double Indemnity.
Yeah.
And then Raymond Chandler wrote the screenplay of Double Indemnity, but he also wrote The Big Sleep,
That's right.
Strangers on a Train, Lady in the Lake, and Murder My Sweet.
And to prepare for this show, I actually read The Maltese Falcon by Hammett and Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. But it's
Mickey Spillane though is a huge. Is
Mike
more of
Hammer.
Mike Hammer.
Reading, you got to read a couple. You got to read like The Maltese Falcon. It's just so much atmosphere. Just adds to this whole discussion. So now you guys have
these novels existed before the films. Is that right?
Yeah.
Most of them.
Yeah.
Well, were they
Depression and post-Depression era?
No. They're novels first. The films are based on
screenplays.
Yeah, exactly.
But did the novelists write the screenplays as well? Were they screenplay writers?
Yeah, some.
Chandler mostly.
Yeah, some
Chandler
did. I don't.
Actually, and then Graham Greene contributed to some of the.
It wasn't Faulkner also.
Faulkner wrote To Have and Have Not, and he also wrote which is Hemingway as a book to begin with. Yes, but he did. But that's what I'm saying. He did screenplay work in Hollywood, and then ran off with his tail between his legs back to somewhere in Nebraska eventually later.
So did Truman Capote for Beat the Devil.
That's true. Goodness, God, this is awesome. What else? And if you were gonna what the hell is his name?
What are you thinking?
What's the guy who wrote The Grifters? The guy who wrote.
Is it an '80s film?
Yes,
that loses my era.
That's a 1990 film. Oh, I can't. Whatever. Anyway, so if we're gonna touch on actual movies, there's the classical period of noir, which is technically starting, and this is by some standards, starting in 1937, 34, 35, 36, getting into what's called the classical era in the early 40s that most historians would agree started with The Maltese Falcon, directed by John Huston in 1941, and for the most part ended around 1957, 58, 59. The new form of film noir beginning around 1950 with In a Lonely Place, Nicholas Ray's film, which starts to get into more of the psychology and the more of the inner demons, the spiritual existential breakdown of man against society or man against other people, instead of just situational or plot-wise. And also, and the end of the classical period is almost firmly stamped with what some people argue is not only the best film noir ever made, but in some cases the best film ever made.
May I guess before you already Touch of Evil.
A Touch of Evil, directed by Orson Welles.
Yep, 58.
So that would be considered, and other main other classical film noirs with certain femme fatales. The Postman Always Rings Twice with Lana Turner, The Killers with Ava Gardner, Gilda with Rita Hayworth, and Jane Greer in Out of the Past. Probably my personal favorite. Now, are there any personal favorite film noirs? I'm wondering, Zavla play. What are maybe some of your favorite personal film noirs that come to mind?
Well, I'd want to defer that question to Mark, because you guys are so much more steeped in it than me, and so I wouldn't be able to give you, the same kind of like overview and then pick my favorite. Where I feel as though you've seen so much more noir. So I mean, go ahead, Mark, and I'll think about it.
I'm going to take that accolade and run with it.
Okay, good.
By a long shot, for me, it's the Maltese Falcon. I mean, the clever, tight exchanges of dialogue. Actually, Sidney Greenstreet is like the greatest character actor in noir, and Humphrey Bogart, obviously, the greatest leading protagonist in noir. It's almost indisputable. I mean, Greenstreet is just great. Now, The Big Sleep. Now there's a significance in that, because there's a certain type of noir film that gets so complicated you just can't keep track of it all. Too many characters, too many circumstances, too many reversals and so forth. And The Big Sleep is kind of is emblematic of that. I think but to answer the question, is Maltese Falcon by a long shot is my favorite. And I just want to point out about Kiss Me Deadly, because Touch of Evil, you're right, it's the great one, but it's kind of almost a reiteration of everything that's come before it. And I find Kiss Me Deadly the conclusion of noir as we know it. Instead of looking for the Blackbird, the Maltese Falcon, which is purely an economical quest, this involves radiation in Kiss Me Deadly, and that it takes it to a global scare, and I think that's as far as we can go with the noir idea. And of course, then there's further permutations beyond that. But and I also love The Lady from Shanghai. It's just the exchanges between the people. Maltese Falcon, Lady from Shanghai, I just think are great noir. But
we happen to have a clip ready to go of Maltese Falcon. Should we go to that right now, or is this a good time to listen to that clip? Okay, so we're going to go to that clip and then we'll continue. So we're going to...
Now, sir, we'll talk if you like. I tell you right out, I'm a man who likes talking to a man who likes to talk.
Swell. Will we talk about the Blackbird?
You're the man for me, sir. No beating about the bush, right to the point. Let's talk about the Blackbird, by all means. But first, sir, answer me a question. Are you here as Miss O'Shaughnessy's representative?
Well, there's nothing certain either way. It depends.
Depends on? Maybe it depends on Joel Cairo.
Maybe.
The question is then which you represent. It'll be one or the other.
I didn't say so.
Who else is it?
There's me.
That's wonderful, sir, wonderful. I do like a man who tells you right out he's looking out for himself. Don't we all? I don't trust a man who says he's not.
Uh-huh. Now let's talk about the Blackbird.
Let's. Mr. Spade, have you any conception of how much money can be got for that Blackbird?
No.
Well, sir, if I told you half, you'd call me a liar.
No, not even if I thought so. But you tell me what it is, and I'll figure out the profit.
You mean you don't know what the bird is?
A wonderful clip. That's from the Maltese Falcon, and that's an exchange between Humphrey Bogart and Sidney Greenstreet, and that's where Greenstreet begins to, hiddenly, well, he reveals somewhat the value of the Maltese Falcon to entice Borchardt to somehow come up with it.
But why did you choose that clip? Why is that the one that you thought was represented?
There's a couple reasons. First of all, it shows Bogart's hardened attitude, who he is. You know, he's a player. He's always a player in this game, being a private detective with all of these underworld figures and so forth, and has to put on a very tough, clever, always in thinking. He's always has to always think on his feet. You know, and so we get some of that, and also we get. Just the whole milieu of the situation of the type of people he has to deal with, such as Sidney Greenstreet, who are very nefarious and clever themselves, you know. So we just kind of get an idea of that psychological milieu that so many of these characters find themselves in. Does that satisfy you, or is Gabe?
I'm wondering if Gabe has any response to it.
I think that the screenplay and the interactions in the Maltese Falcon are sort of. I mean, it is based on a play as well, so it's just that it's so there's such a quippiness. The editing in the film is so well done. It's so masterful. It's so quick, and it's light at the same time. There's just a buoyancy to the exchanges in the film, and there's a feverish tone of excitement I've seen the film maybe 4 or 5 times, and every time I see it, I'm still kind of suspenseful. I'm still waiting for what I know is going to happen, but I'm still a little bit like on edge when Peter Lorre's in the screen. I'm waiting for the things that I know Spade's going to do, but when he does, they still surprise me. They still jump out at me. They still shock me. And he's such a likable character, and he just is always, he's always in the circumstance of just these horrible people surrounded by him, but the dialogue is just so sarcastic and is so funny. It's continually a movie I always recommend to people when they ask me a good drama, just a good film to watch. I've borrowed the Maltese Falcon at least 10 or 15 times out to people.
I have to ask you this, Gabe, seriously, how is it based on a play? I know it's based on Dashiell Hammett's novel. Mm-hmm. The only reason why I ask you this, because I love reading plays, and it was
a stage play before it was a film. It was adapted into a play.
During that period,
before the movie.
Yeah, well, because there's actually a couple versions before the 41 version of the Maltese Falcon.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
But if it was also a stage play, I'd like to investigate that, because I know there's the 2 other film versions, and I'll look into that, man. So thank you if this is a revealing moment.
Absolutely. So the Big Sleep, the Maltese Falcon. And should we round it up to 5? Any 3 others to fill in the gaps, just maybe for the listeners to maybe investigate on their own?
Well, I would, this is jumping way ahead, but I would, and this is totally breaks out of the chronological mold or the containment we've established. That's Body Heat from '81, directed by Lawrence Kasdan with Kathleen Turner and William Hurt. The only reason why I jump ahead and completely break out of this is because it is such a finite idea of film noir. Now remember, now they have under the belt, they have all this history of film noir, and it's regurgitated into Body Heat, so that really will give a quite a finite explanation of what film noir is. I mean, there's The Third Man, by Carol Reed, which is hugely famous film noir. I mean, I don't know how to answer that. Like he says, Touch of Evil, that's great. I mean, I don't, it's crazy. The Big Heat, the Big Sleep, certainly. And also to jump ahead, and sorry, because I think we're losing control, or I'm creating this loss of control, but it was Polanski's Chinatown.
I was gonna mention Chinatown, and to me that's interesting. Body Heat and Chinatown, noir to me. I always imagined it being black. One of the characteristics is it had to be black and white cinema. And you guys are the first people to sort of enlighten me to the fact that noir goes beyond the black and white era of cinema, and it transcends into color cinema as well. Because Chinatown's in the 80s, right?
No,
74.
74. And Double Indemnity, actually, back to that era. That would be a defining point in noir. So Maltese Falcon, Double Indemnity, and Touch of Evil would be in black and white right there.
And so I would say if I had to give my My top picks, mine definitely include neo-noirs. Mine definitely include ones outside of the standard classical period, because that's when I think these film lovers, these film scholars, these people who truly loved watching cinema and just digested it and took it and just made their new vision of it. While it's not in my top 5, The Conformist is essential viewing for anyone who truly loves cinema. That's a film that has broken and just battered people in so many ways. I mean, that's just politically, it's a completely outspoken and just
But is that really noir?
unapologetic film.
I argue against that.
It's somewhat of, I would say in some ways it's a neo-noir, but it's not a typical noir. But in terms of tone and in terms of fashion, I would say that film, for me, typifies the type of man against society tone that I typify with noir. But that's why I wouldn't put it in my top 5, because I don't actually consider it a film noir.
And let me actually use your digression and add to it a little bit. With speaking of Bertolucci, is also his partner, which is off the subject. But if you're going to see The Conformist, also see partner, and that's of interest.
Absolutely. So I would say that my top picks, and one of them is a double pick, would be Double Indemnity and The Lost Weekend. Both Billy Wilder, both 44, and then The Lost Weekend 45. Some of the most excellent black and white composition ever put on film. Some of the greatest framing of a human being ever put in film. Some of the greatest zooms and tracking shots and pans ever put on film. Considering the bulkiness and the heaviness of these cameras, the fluidity, the ballerina-esque movement of these giant cameras is just stunning. The exchanges, the utter bitterness of some of the characters in some of these scenes, and then the tranquility also as well. The opposing tones, the shift in tones in these films are just absolutely amazing. The Lost Weekend is about alcoholism, but it is a demonic film that is not to be taken lightly. I would say that'd be my top number 1 pick. My second pick would be The Big Combo, which I oftentimes say is my favorite noir. As an individual film, I'd say it's just brutal. It's badass. It cannot be screwed with. It's amazing. That's Joseph H. Lewis. That was a bottom of the barrel B film. In its time, it was not regarded well, and to this day, it's often cited as maybe the greatest example of film noir cinematography. Laura is another great pick. I love Otto Preminger's script. It's an unconventional film. It goes against type of a lot of the film noir conventions. It's a little more uplifting. It's a little more positive, and it's a little more melodrama structured than some of the other noirs. But it's just so well told. It's similar to Rebecca. It's just so well told and well shot and well made. Great Hollywood filmmaking at its best. The Conversation, a neo-noir from 1974. It's definitely my favorite Coppola film, and it's the most paranoid film ever made. It's scary, it's frightening, and it has one of the strangest and most disillusioned endings of any film ever made. It will haunt you. It will get into your soul. It will leave you questioning your own life and whether you are insane. It's cinema at its existential greatest. And this is one that I've gotten into a lot of arguments with people about, Point Blank, which is another neo-noir from 1960. This is from the late 60s. Simply for the soundtrack and the use of sound effect editing in the film to create a psychological and spiritual mood that is just haunting and will drive you a little nuts. And this is a more typical noir in terms of the narrative going all over the place and having the soundtrack from one scene over another scene. It's very disillusioning. You don't know what time frame you're watching at times. You don't know what era you're watching. You don't even know if you're watching a character who's alive or dead half the time. Similar to some scenes in Sunset Boulevard and some of the alive or dead sort of enchantment of that movie. But Point Blank is definitely my favorite Lee Marvin movie, and definitely one of the more hard-boiled, unapologetic films ever made. Really violent stuff.
Yeah, that's John Boorman did Point Blank, and he actually did Deliverance, which is a masterpiece.
Not noir, but amazing.
Exactly, thank you. And when you bring up Point Blank, that's also the era of Dirty Harry, which some people have thrown in as noir of that period. But you're getting off the track. That's a little bit of a stretch.
Well, let me ask. I have a question, and mainly directed at Mark, but also Gabe, maybe. Now, Mark, one of the reasons we're doing this show is because you, in particular, have an interest in noir. Is that right? Am I wrong?
No, I'm actually, I do some writing in that realm, and I am fascinated by the films. Like even like when Gabe's talking about the Conversation, like we had mentioned the Parallax View, the Conversation, 3 Days of the Condor, which are noir, and also we can the Manchurian Candidate, you could say, the original one. And also, you have to also think about Siegel's 56 Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's very important to think about, man. And you talk about paranoia, you talk about societal paranoia.
Post-World War II.
All of that, thank you, all of that stuff. And of course, that does not answer your question.
No, but actually you were following up on what Gabe was doing, which was kind of giving us a sense of the noir films that stand out to you, and also kind of how they go outside of that narrow period of time and move out into almost into the 80s. But getting back to personal reasons, it's more of a personal question. What is your personal attraction to noir cinema?
Well, because it uses the imagination. First of all, it's more abstract, it's more imaginative, because the dialogue and so forth can be heightened because it's tough guy stuff. So we have to imagine how to be tough. It's not our common language. We're trying to persuade. We're trying to persuade others while we're trying to protect ourselves and so forth. So it's the embodiment. It's the calling up of imagination. And like when I write more and so forth, it becomes more descriptive. It becomes more. You leave the ground kind of to have more challenging images, more clever dialogue, so that it more inspires that.
Would you say that David Lynch, in a sense, carries noir over a little bit, especially like Blue Velvet?
Yeah, absolutely. David Lynch epitomizes the imagination. You see the reaches of the imagination. So that could actually be not only the conclusion, but the perpetual in noir could be Lynch.
Oh yeah, is there a film clip that we should look at next?
Yeah, I think.
Or listen to next.
One of them, because I mean, our time just flies, and I would like to jump maybe to Body Heat.
Okay. And since we've been talking a lot about those.
The neo-noir.
Okay, so set up this scene if you remember it.
Sure. This is between William Hurt, who is this small-town Florida lawyer, and this woman he's fallen for. What's great about that is we really don't know who she is. It's a great twist at the end, or a great revelation, I should say. So in this particular scene, they have now expressed their lust for each other. They are now bound together.
Right.
But that's not good enough because she has a husband. So now they must deal with that, and this is what this clip will illustrate.
Okay. Oops. I'm bouncing.
So that clip was from Body Heat, and what we've established with that clip is this.
He left this morning. I had to see. I couldn't call. I was afraid to. I was afraid you wouldn't let me come.
That's right. You mustn't call. Never call. Be very careful now about the phone. The phone company keeps records.
I am careful. Ned, I hated it. I hated sitting there with the two of you. I thought I was going to scream.
You did good. You called my apartment from the house.
No, never.
No, those 2 times?
I went to phone booth.
Oh.
I'm afraid of him, Ned. I'm always afraid.
Good. You have to be very careful now about the phones.
Why, Ned? Why do you say this
We
now?
could account for a couple of calls. We've had some contact. It would make sense.
Why, Ned? What's happened?
Because we're going to kill him. We both know that.
Feels somewhat the value of the Maltese Falcon to entice Borchardt to somehow come up with it. So that clip was from Body Heat, and what we've established with that clip is this passion. It not only has their physical consummation occurred, but now, again, she has a husband, and you have
something has to be done about that.
And you found out what is going to be done, but via that clip.
So,
So anyway, the reason why we're talking about Body Heat is because, you know, when this is made in the early '80s. Kasdan obviously was a student of noir. You know, he regurgitated that knowledge and showed us what he knew. So the reason for this importance of these film students, I'm not talking that academic that they went particularly to a university, but obviously they studied film, had the opportunity to see all the noir films that these other directors during the time didn't. They weren't as knowledgeable, whether you know, as we are now, because we have all this intense information to deal with, and Body Heat is an illustration of that information. So we're hit between the eyes with hardcore noir.
You know, another good neo-noir that I'm drawn to, that I really like, that is oftentimes split right down the middle, and especially between passionate cinema goers and film lovers, is Sin City. Is a film that either people love or they hate, and they're like, I just hate that movie. And I get it; it's a very specific tone. There's a very specific intention, tonality. Archetypical type of character. There's a specific type of violence and a very specific type of storytelling in that. And if it doesn't resonate with you, it's a very ugly movie that you're not going to like. But every single story in that film literally is about a man against type, a noir man who's sort of against the law or against society, against the grain of culture, defending the honor of hookers. And the hookers, or these really tough women, are the only people who sort of have any moral fiber or any moral fabric and have any sort of code of decency or honor. I mean, it's just these really brutal stories, but the way that Rodriguez sort of brings out the stylistic intensity and the fluidity of these stories, the Frank Miller's characters and Frank Miller's imagination, especially using the color red and the color green and the color blue, and the violence, the blood, the gore, it's so comical, it's so over the top, and it's just like a roller coaster ride. And I think that, and there's a great symbiosis, not symbiosis, there's a great, what do you call it? A great juxtaposition of the old with the new, of like there's these 1940s cars, but everything that's happening is sort of with the edge of 2000s. There's these there's the technology, there's the requirements, there's the cell phones of the 2000s, but there's the police detective who wears the old uniform from the 1940s. And it is sort of like this Tarantino-esque tone of like, what decade are we in? And I love that. And Pulp Fiction sort of goes into that too. That sort of this like noir-edged, where are we? Why are we here? But God damn it, I love being here. This is so weird.
Yeah, Batman from '89 does that with the modernity and the classical. But I want to point out with Sin City is that this gets into the realm of metafilm, where film is aware of itself. Film is very aware of all of the attributes, from composition to whatever, man. Again,
also previous cinema.
Yeah, there you go. These guys are aware of film. It's metafilm, film that is aware of itself.
Yeah,
tongue-in-cheek and overly aware.
Aware of its history, very aware of its technique.
And that there's going to be lovers and haters too. Extreme cineasts who are going to love it, and people who are going to dismiss it, and it's almost uncaring of the dismissers.
And at a certain point, it becomes like a simulacrum of the original. In other words, it's just like it's a remaking of a. It's cinema about cinema rather than cinema about life. It's cinema about cinema.
That's really true.
And
that's true.
And it loses some of its genuineness. To me, it's part of what I pick up in every film, not just these early noir films, is the atmosphere, the sense that you're looking at Bogart, but you're looking at his hair. Oh, men comb their hair this way at that time. It's genuine. The articles of clothing, the way people behave, their accents, all those things are things that you can't recreate. You can't make them again. You can try, but you can't capture time again. And so, in a sense, you're living in that time. When you watch those films, you're sort of bathing yourself, your mind, in that time period. And so, when I see these reprises of that era, that's the one thing that fails to happen. Of course, now you're in another time zone. You're actually experiencing whatever that era is of Sin City. You know,
I think Chinatown is maybe one of the few examples that does it really well. Maybe. The Day of the Locust is another one that really, like, just you forget you're watching a movie that was made in 1975.
Or you're watching a film that's made in 1975, and you're not pretending that it's not 1975, but yet they're using those same elements. Yes. It's almost as if the directors from the 50s and 40s were transported into the present, and we're just using the present in a very pragmatic and realistic way. In other words, it's less artificial. It feels genuine.
Yes,
is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that, because a film like LA Confidential is not meta cinema. That's genuinely like a really good, really hard-boiled story. That's its own thing, and it happens to take place in the 50s, and it happens to have been made in 1997. But it appeals less to that like nerdy. That like nerdy, like
or like a Happy Days
having
version.
to reference. Yes, there's less nostalgia, and there's more of there's just more of like this grittiness of like, well, the story happens to take place then, so let's do our best to make it look like it takes place then.
Yeah, and when you were so beautifully telling us this, explaining this, I was thinking about Terrence Malick's Badlands, which beautifully captures the period of its time, even though it's shot in the early 70s. You're just in the time.
Yeah. And what about Glengarry Glen Ross? I mean, I know that's a play adapted to cinema.
Yeah, it's Mamet, dude.
David Mamet, but it has a very noir.
That's very true. That was written on my list, actually.
I mean,
not proto.
He is Mamet is dialogue, man.
He is noir.
I mean, that's crazy dialogue. That's dialogue at you, man. So, yeah.
Well, we've been talking with Mark Borchardt about film noir, and man, it's just been a gangster of a time. This has just been crazy. This has been great.
And Zav LaPlay. Our man.
Goes without saying.
We're always here. Yeah. Gabe Van Handel and Zav LaPlay, we're always here. We're always having a nervous breakdown. We're always having a great time. We're always having a heart attack, and we're always just sipping on a cup of milk, even though there's no cups of milk around here. We're just having a blast. Let me tell you, Mark Borchardt, our month.
Barnaby Jones, who would have a glass of milk every time we go to the bar. I think it was Barnaby Jones.
I think, yeah. That's who I'm referencing. So our monthly guest, Mark Borchardt, always a pleasure. A film historian, a film master, a filmmaker, the film maestro of Milwaukee. Always a pleasure to have you here, Mark. Thank you so damn much.
And thank you, Gabe, and thank you, Zav. And your kindness is only exceeded by your intelligence. Thank you.
All right, we've been wrapping this up, and we're going back to, I'm sure, a quick, quiet exit also from Zav and Gabe's regular broadcast show, which will be happening live. This is the end of our interview. Thanks so much.
All right, great.
And that was an interview with Mark Borchardt about film noir, which was conducted earlier this evening. And now back to a live broadcast. Gabe Van Handel here with Zav LaPlay, and we're going to give you some box office and film news. August 10th. Your box office for last weekend. How about that? August 3rd through August 5th. Total Recall is being totally recalled. It's the latest big budget, heavily marketed sci-fi movie to underwhelm or allure or entice audiences in any way, shape, or form. John Carter, the biggest bomb of all time now, is another example. Battleship, another huge example earlier this year. Two biggest bombs so far this year besides this side of Rock of Ages and That's My Boy, the two giant comedy / other non-sci-fi spectacle bombs with star-studded extravaganzas going on within them as well. Underperformers. Total Recall's debut is just slightly ahead of the originals. $25.58 million versus the original's $25.53 million. Unfortunately, the original came out 22 years ago, so slightly more amount of people went to the original than to the new one. And the original has the remake has a pretty pathetic C+ cinema score. So the word of mouth is probably just going to drag this one down. This one's going to come and go before you know it pretty fast. Diary of a Wimpy Kid 3 did way less than the other two films in their openings, and word of mouth on this movie is likely to be good, A- cinema score. But the opening is the majority of the take for all of these movies so far in this series, so this one is likely to wind down the series and probably going to be the last one in the set. The Watch had a 49% drop from last weekend. In the second week, that is really bad to have. That happens usually in the third or fourth or subsequent weeks where 35 to 40 and sometimes even higher percent drop happens. It's not that crazy. It's not that bad for a film. But a movie like this with as many stars in it and as much money attached to it, it's pretty bad. Seeing as that Jonah Hill and Vince Vaughn and Ben Stiller are meant to be drawers. It's only made $25.5 million in 10 days, and it's likely to be placed alongside That's My Boy as star-studded comedy flops this summer. Ted, however, has passed the 200 million mark, placing it alongside the R-rated comedy elite to do so in the history of R-rated comedies. Wedding Crashers, The Hangover, and Hangover 2. Step Up Revolution is in its third week, and it is just dying. It is falling apart, and it is just dead. Do you have the box office mojo?
Yes. And here's the box office mojo for Gabe.
So, your actual numbers for the weekend, in case you're interested, are... The Dark Knight Rises was still first. This is just not a surprise anymore. Third week in a row. I mean, this movie is just killing people. It's just killing it. $35 million. Total of $353 million. Big money, big movie. Total Recall did $25 million. That's an opening film. Diary of a Wimpy Kid 3, Dog Days, opening movie, $14 million. Ice Age Continental Drift in its fourth week did $8 million, bringing its total up to $132. That's the lowest take of any of the films, of all four films in the series, is likely to have the lowest take by far of any of them. The other film, Ice Age 3, had a grand total domestic intake of 172. This film is not likely to make that, to reach that amount. The Watch, $6 million, second week, not looking good. It probably won't even make its budget of $68 million. Step Up Revolution is 6th with 5.9. Ted is 7th in its 6th week with 5.6, bringing it up to 203. Like I said, passing the 200 million mark.
Is there just a question about this? Because so this is Box Office Mojo. What is that? That's a website that tells you how much money the movies are making.
It's a website that is one of three sites that I go to for my box office information, for my box office source. But it has the most precise technical numbers of the box office, and it has numerous articles every week about the breakdown of where the box office was last week, which I am not interested in what was going on last week around this time. What was going on franchise-wise for films that come out, like this versus the other movies, this versus other movies in a genre both last year and this year that it's performing like or against, like how movies are performing against other movies of its type, and how movies are performing in their season. How it's just a very technical website about the breakdown of money that comes in. It's not my cup of tea because I really don't care that much about the box office. But in terms of like, I do check it every week just to see like if a movie that I like or if a movie I'm interested in is doing big numbers. It is movie news. And it is like, if a movie is failing and falling apart and flopping completely, it is relevant to something. I mean, it doesn't determine anything about the quality of the film whatsoever. But it is. I like it when the little engine that could makes it. I like when the underdogs, movies that are just like that the studios, like original movies with original concepts that are like small films.
Moonlight Rising.
Moonlight Kingdom.
Moonlight Kingdom.
Yeah, like movies like that,
call it Moonlight Rising,
which are sleeper hits. I mean, that movie cost $60 million to make, and it's made $40 million. Right. It actually just dropped out of the top 10 this week. It's number 11. a movie like that is just, I love keeping up with it. I love knowing that it's doing good business. I love knowing that that people, it gives, what part of the box office, one thing I love about it is it gives me faith that there is still an audience that loves to go out there to see good movies, original movies that they've heard about from other people or that they've read about and are like, I want to see something that is probably going to be really good, original, fresh, and different, and engaging and not insulting.
Well, is there out there must be some sort of, rather than box office, what about, is there sort of like a rating chart of like what people said they, like how many people said they really liked something, or is it through money that we can determine the quality of movies, or is there any real way? I guess
when I do the other half of my box office and movie news, when I
you go based on critics.
I go to RottenTomatoes.com.
Okay, Rotten Tomatoes.
Which does two things. It goes on audience ratings of what percentage of audience people that submitted reviews liked it or didn't like it or whatever, which basically means gave it a good strong 2.5 stars. Or like a liked 2.5 stars, or above, which is considered in some circles a B- or above is considered a good review.
Yeah.
And then anything less than a low 2.5 stars, a C+, or below that is considered a bad review. So what Rotten Tomatoes does is I could care less whether it's rotten or fresh. Is I go on the percentage of what it gets, and I go to the top critics column and I read down the section of the top critics. I mean, if 7 out of 10 of the critics, especially the ones that I personally like to read for entertainment and that I generally like, are like, these are intelligent people who love movies, are engaging in movies and writing about movies because it's what they're good at. It's what they love to do. They're so passionate about film that they'd be writing about movies whether they were paid to do it or not.
Yeah.
So it just happens to be their job that they're critics, and they're good critics. They're intelligent. They don't write for their publication. They don't write about movies because they're handed like what I call them gift basket critics, which are like
unlike us,
KLRP.
Well, we get all kinds of gift baskets.
We get all kinds of goodies to speak really well about,
about noir cinema.
Yeah, we got so many gift baskets from 20th Century Fox for me panning the Dark Knight Rises, which I'm sure will dissuade no one from going to see it the third time. So,
when I order movies, I order DVDs online for the video store a lot. What I often try to do is I'll look at movies that have a high number of reviews. So like 85 would be a high, or in the hundreds would be a very high number. So that would tell me, okay, this is something website? People like on Amazon.
Sure.
And that would tell me that a lot of people like the movie. And then I would look at the star rating in addition to that. So it's like, how many people reviewed it? For example, you might have something, like a Twilight or something that's got 150 reviews, but it has like 2 stars on average, where you might have another film that's got 2 reviews and it's got 5 stars. And both of those tell you, well, the Twilight one would tell you, okay, this movie's really, really got a lot. Like, this might have a lot of box office, right? Yeah, well, but it's got very
Twilight
bad.
It's just kind of a no-brainer to get anyway, because it's.
Well, I was just saying, as a for instance, once in a while you'll have a movie that has very low star rating but a very high interest.
That wouldn't be like part of a franchise. That's just
like the Avengers,
some Joe Schmo movie,
or like War. What's Battleship?
Battleship.
You'd have a huge number of people who would review it, but probably the average rating would be like 2 stars as opposed to 5 stars.
Absolutely.
And then occasionally you'll have a movie that no one's seen and it's got 5 stars. Like one person's reviewing it and it's got 5 stars, and that doesn't tell you anything because that could be the filmmaker's mom.
That's true. But there's a chance that if it got a couple of small but really passionate and good reviews, that there's going to at least be a couple of people that are likely to rent it.
Have you ever gone to Metacritic?
Yeah, Metacritic. I actually find I also go to Metacritic in as well as I go to Rotten Tomatoes.
Right.
Metacritic is a little distracting because what their rating score is out of 100 is out of 10, and they changed the reviewing system, whereas Rotten Tomatoes, if you look at each critic's review, it tells you based on the critic's system, it sticks to the critic's individual system, whether it's like a rating like A, B, C, D, F, or like if they rate it out of 10 or if they rate it out of 4 stars. they keep that to that, and then they tell you what their review was individually, and then whether it was like either fresh or rotten.
Yeah.
And then they take the percentage of fresh and then they put that on like what the film's toll was.
Right.
Like The Bourne Legacy, for instance, which is opening this week, got 60% fresh. But if you go to the top critics section, even the bad reviews for it are mostly positive reviews. There's one-star review of the film. Overall, I'd say the film's, like I said, 60% of critics liked it, which also translates to the percentage of critics that liked it is pretty even with what the rating of the film is. Like if you would take it like out of 10, like 6 out of 10, or like a high 2.5 stars. So it's like half, like a 50% is like 2.5, pretty much like down the middle.
Yeah.
And then over that would be like a high 2.5. So it's like 60% is like the plus, like a C plus or like a B minus, 2.5 plus. So then when you take that, you look at the reviews, and generally the reviews, the moderate review for that is like an average 3-star, like a low 3-star, or a high 2.5 stars. There's a lot of 2.5-star reviews of that film, really praising it for the filmmaking, for the cinematography, for the editing, for Jeremy Renner's performance, for the fact that they're creating a new piece in the genre. They're creating a great action genre piece. They're creating a new addition to this series without a book to base it on. They're creating it out of the universe that's already created, but they're like, there's something missing. So it's not a 3.5 or 4-star action film like the two latter Paul Greengrass directed Bourne films, which were generally regarded as two of the best action films ever directed in mainstream Hollywood. Like 3.5, 4-star reviews, pretty much across the board. So this one, in comparison to that, is like, well, like a high 2.5 because it's still well made, it's still well directed, it's engaging, it's intelligent, it's a little more complicated or like more thought provoking than the average film. There's like political overtones, but there's something missing. So it Rotten Tomatoes has a pretty damn good system set up for all sorts of visitors. Of people just looking for like, well, what's it? Is it rotten or fresh? Or is it 60% of critics liked it? Well, then it's a 60% out of 10 movie. But like, if you want to investigate further on your own, it has links to each critic's full review, which is what I always check out. It actually is a huge shortcut for me because I used to have to like go to all these different websites to have to check out like 10, like my 10 favorite critics, like Stephen Ray from the Philadelphia Inquirer, both critics, Owen Gleiberman and Lisa Schwartzbaum from Entertainment Weekly.
But they're all. This is like a clearinghouse of all
linked.
of them.
They're all linked right in there
into the Rotten Tomatoes. What about Metacritic?
Metacritic does the same thing, but their rating system is different, and it's oftentimes like 10 or 20 points separate from, and because they incorporate in some cases way more critics, but they're lesser. In my opinion, they're less valid, or they're more fringe critics. They incorporate like too much information, or they don't incorporate enough, and so they base it on like, if for a smaller film, sometimes they only base it on like reviewers from like really fringe websites or something. And then for like movies that are like really widely, they're like incorporate everything, and then like a bunch of fringe websites gave like a pretty much like a good movie across the board, like, you know, rated like 3 stars. Like they like either gave it like a really good review or they panned it for whatever personal reasons these websites are associated with. Like, let's say it's a horror film, so they go to a bunch of horror websites. So the horror websites give it a really good review, but it's an average film at best. So then the score is skewed. So that's why I avoid Metacritic.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I've noticed that their reviews are a little bit inaccurate.
I don't trust, and just for personal reasons. But long before I started this show, when I would look, you know, when a movie would come out, and I was really anxious to see like whether it was good or bad, because I was like just intrigued by it. Like, oh, I want to see this movie, and then like, oh, it's a piece of crap. Like Metacritic sometimes threw me off in the wrong direction. I'm like, oh, I should have just not cared what any critic said and seen it. But when I discovered Rotten Tomatoes and I stuck with Rotten Tomatoes, I discovered that pretty much like 9 times out of 10, it was pretty accurate on most levels of like intelligence and like just because these are I mean, like if you go to the top critics section especially, these are avid film goers who love movies for like the right reasons. They love, like, they can enjoy a stupid movie for the same stupid reasons as any of us, like a gross out comedy, as long as it's not just like stupid and like amateurish and pathetically done. If it's actually funny, like 21 Jump Street is a pretty childish movie, but it's real. But I thought it was really funny because it's intelligently childish. It's like, it's silly and gross out, but it's done with like this charm and this charisma. So it's like, even though it's, you know, got some bad reviews, for the most part, they're like, this is a pretty damn funny movie. And these are people who are like generally like, you know, like give praise to like the art house films of the year. They put those on their top 10 of the year list, but also give credit to like a mainstream film with pretty mainstream stuff done for the masses, but done well. They watch so many movies that like when something half decent when something intelligent and just a good movie comes along, they're like, this is worth watching. Please go see this. Please avoid another Adam Sandler movie at all costs. Please just spend your money on something at least 3 stars or better.
All right, well, I feel like I distracted you from your...
Oh, it's okay. So Amazing Spider-Man, 10 minutes later, Spider-Man was 8th with 4.4 million, bringing its grand total up to 250 million. Still the lowest entry in the series, but still, that's a lot of friggin' money. Brave, 9th with 2.9 million, bringing its total up to 223 million. Magic Mike is 10th, still just rocking it in the top 10 with 1.4, bringing its grand, just ball-breaking total up to $110 million from its $7 million budget. That's a lot of money made for Warner Brothers. Big numbers for Steven Soderbergh. Good job, buddy. You did it. So that's my box office news. Now my film news, my movies that are being released news. And Zod has revealed a movie after that as well. I'm very excited about this. He saw a movie without me, that naughty boy. So here's what's coming out August 10th. The Bourne Legacy, the 4th movie in the Bourne series, starring Jeremy Renner, taking over the reins from Matt Damon.
Matt Damon, yeah.
Yep. And what's his name? Tony Gilroy, the director. Michael Clayton, and also the writer of the previous 3 Bourne films, and also the writer of the great film Traffic, of the American version of Traffic, is at behind the scenes.
Is the Bourne series a book series?
Yes, by Robert Ludlum.
Oh, okay. And
they were popular.
So it's kind of shaping up to be a little bit like the Bond series, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a certain way?
That's what they're trying to do with this. They're trying to continue the series and hope that it can keep going. And it's a little more political.
Yeah.
It's a little darker, and it's definitely...
Right. No, it's not like James Bond.
But it's
not
similar.
structured.
It's very similar, though.
It's more, it's not about... It's not so much about, like, sexy girls and stuff. Yeah, sex and guns.
And gadgets.
And humor. Yeah, Bond always had humor in it.
So here would be my... So, like I said, we haven't seen this movie yet, but I want Zav and I hopefully to go to a double header on Sunday. We'll see if this happens, or Monday. I want to see at least 2 of these movies that came out so we can review them for you next week and give you our take on them. I'm excited for all 3 of these movies. Anyway, Bourne Legacy. From what I've been reading, momentum-driven action thriller full of epic action scenes. However, without Matt Damon, the soul and emotional engaging core is gone. Renner is an interesting substitute, though, with brooding, lasting, intense intelligence and just a vibrance to himself. Tony Gilroy, the writer of the trilogy, brings his weary, direct virtuosity that made Michael Clayton so taut and the screenplay of Traffic so memorable. And Rachel Weisz plays the female lead in the film. She's beautiful, and I think she's a great actress, and she's always engaging, and it's great to watch. She's a personal favorite, my personal favorite actress. Not my personal favorite actress, but she's one of my favorite actresses, so I'm looking forward to this movie. I'd like to see it, even though it might be a little bit of a disappointment. I'm willing to accept that, because I love Jeremy Renner. I love The Hurt Locker, and I think he was really good in what was it called? Mission Impossible 4: Ghost Protocol, which was in a lot of ways a standard by the book action film, but in a lot of ways an extremely engaging movie. I loved it. I thought it was way better than any of the other passable movies in the series. The Campaign just came out. This is a political farce about Will Ferrell plays a senator, a candidate who's been unchallenged, untested for years and years, and after a sex scandal comes up, a couple of billionaire philanthropists decide to fund a challenger in Zach Galifianakis, who is a strangely effeminate, very awkward, very movie character type of character, who is going to be his challenger, and they use a slew of political advisors and no-nonsense political types to clean him up and get him ready for Del McDermott plays his top political aide, who cleans him up and makes him look ready for politics. So I actually read pretty good reviews for this, and I read a good reviews from sources that I thought would have slashed this film, and some bad reviews from sources that I thought would have praised this for the silliness and some of the more overt Will Ferrell stuff. So, crude political satire isn't as sharp as it should be in an election year, but weirdly at its best, when its lazy commentary is put on the back burner and the absurdism is allowed to boil. Some are saying it is relevant, though, comparable to Wag the Dog, Bulworth, and Idiocracy. Directed by Jay Roach, who besides directing the Austin Powers films and the terrible Meet the Fockers movies, has also directed astute HBO political films like Recount and the brilliant Game Change, both about the money-drenched media hell, mirrors and mirrors world of the campaign crusades that we live in, and the world of charades that surround it. There's lots of commentary on the appearances that rule the image of candidates rather than real ideas. So, I mean, I think both of these actors are funny, but what I've been reading is that all the jokes, all the intensity, all the great lasting belly laugh scenes in this movie are all played out in the first half, and then there's a really serious resolution in the last 30 minutes to kind of wrap itself up, as is the case with a lot of movies of this type, and especially Will Ferrell movies. Hope Springs is coming out, which I've been kind of excited for since the beginning. Meryl Streep is one of my 3 favorite actresses. She's amazing. Tommy Lee Jones plays her husband. They play an aging couple who's lost their spark. Their sex life is just non-existent, and their marriage has lost its passion. They love each other, but there's just something missing. So they go to a weekend retreat, and Steve Carell plays their therapist who guides them through and talks to them. Now, had Nancy Meyers, the woman who directed Something's Gotta Give,
you ever notice
What Women
how
Want,
the word give is planted directly in the middle of the word forgiveness? Which was another movie with
Meryl.
As if to remind you that the
This
redemption
movie would
that
have been really
accompanies it is a
sappy,
gift
really,
and not an entitlement. See,
it would have just over-attempted its humor. It would have forced its humor. It would have had probably an intelligent screenplay, but it wouldn't have had the maturity and the depth that it needed. However,
and there's a hole in the bucket that carries
the
my
main comparison that I've been reading about this
Your
movie is Scenes from a Marriage.
Assurance has ass as a prefix for
that
a
is
reason. Commit transgression with
literally
audience,
almost every review I read made a comparison to that film. But there's a lot of direct, very brutal, very honest, very emotionally naked scenes in this movie that don't have music behind them to hide it. This movie feels direct, and yes, it is funny. Yes, it's kind of a screwball romantic, not screwball. It's kind of a silly romantic comedy at times, but it is also a painfully real movie that is full of tears.
This is a movie you haven't seen yet, but you're reviewing for.
Well, this is what I've been reading, that it's just full of this stuff. This is, I mean, these are personal reactions from critics that I've been reading about. Normally, critics don't cry, they don't admit that they cry a lot during movies, but there are several critics who said that this is a powerful, that there are powerful moments in the film. So, similar to Bergman's Scene from a Marriage, for the
which, to be, I'll be, I have Scenes from a Marriage here, and I've never watched it. I should watch it.
It's a great movie.
Maybe I'll watch that tonight.
Especially the full cut, the extended, the longer cut of the film. I believe it was aired. It was a made-for-TV movie, either in like Italy.
That's what I was gonna say. I thought it was a TV series, but I guess it's a made-for-TV movie.
You know what it was? It was a TV series that was broken down and released as a movie in England and in the States. And abroad.
Okay.
So there's parts of it. So there's the full cut is the full series, is what I'm saying.
Oh, all right. Yeah, because it comes in a box. Like there's maybe 3 discs.
And there was the version that was released in the theaters, like in '78 or whatever, was a shortened version, like a drastically shortened version of it. But the full version, which I've seen, is like the whole series, is the whole miniseries, and that's just it's stranglingly great. It's awesome. So Scenes from a Marriage, but for the Oprah age, which is good and bad, I guess, but it's done intelligently through and through, from set design, which I've been reading about in it. That
wait, you just called it Scenes from a Marriage, but the original title is, the title of the Meryl Streep film
is Hope Springs.
Oh yeah, Hope Springs.
And then from the set design to the spot-on performances to unfashionable, irony-free, honest, moving examinations of sex after 50 and the dimming of passion in a long marriage. Plenty of laughs, plenty of tears, a good, intelligent, low-key film worthy of mass consumption, free of superheroes and explosions. But I'm sure that there's a lot of conventions. I'm sure there's problems with this film, which is why I want to see it. I want to be... I would like to see this movie for all the things that I've described, but I'd also like to know, what doesn't work in this movie? What are you hiding from me? What won't you tell me, Roger?
Well, when I was... went to the Downer Theater to watch... Beasts of the Southern Wild,
which I'm glad he saw.
The other option was Hope Springs, and I chose the opposite. And when I came out of the Beasts of the Southern Wild, I looked at the poster to the Meryl Streep film, and I thought, wow, I'm really glad I chose Beasts of the Southern Wild. Not to say that Hope Springs is a bad film. Of course, I have no idea. I haven't seen it.
Totally freaking predictable.
It looks very, very cliche and predictable. But Beasts of the Southern Wild is I don't want to say the exact opposite, but it's quite uncliche. It's very unpredictable.
What's it about?
Okay, well, let me play a little clip from it. It's some clip that they have online here.
Will you come in, Mr. Cairo?
Oh. Well, this is actually a clip from Maltese Falcon. Sorry about that. We've been having, oh, by the way, we screwed up, or I should say I screwed up, because I'm the guy in charge of all this stuff. I screwed up several times with our sound already today, where you heard Mark Borchardt talking before, I forget what happened, but Elmo came along and screwed us up. Anyway, here's a clip. I'm sorry, we'll do it again.
They think we all gonna drown down here, but we ain't going nowhere. The bathtub had more holidays than the whole rest of the world.
So this film stars, I'm gonna screw up her name. It's Kavenge Janae Wallace. She looks like she's about 6 or 7 years old. And
she's a non-actress too.
This girl carries the movie. It is incredible. I'll tell you, the one thing I came out of this film thinking is I can't believe this film exists. It was so, it was unbelievable to me. The acting was so authentic. Not necessarily good acting. It wasn't the kind of acting that like brought you to tears.
Non-professional acting.
It was non-professional, but it was very realistic, extremely realistic. She was, and you could just feel her devotion to her craft. You know, this little kid just getting into acting. It was incredible. The father character is a little weak for the similar, you know, because he's totally authentic, but just not that compelling. You know, to be a great movie actor or to carry a movie, you have to have physical appearances. You have to be interesting in all kinds of ways, beyond just being like a cool person or, you know, like a good, interesting human being. You have to be, in a way, you have to be larger than life. And he's not larger than life. He's an ordinary person. He delivers his lines very, very well, very realistically, but just not, it's not above and beyond, you know, it's not what we're used to with film. It's not something that, the drama doesn't just pull you and give you tears and so on. But regardless, and also I could say the same thing about the directing, the acting, or no, I shouldn't say the directing, the same thing about the script, the cinematography. They're all pretty average. It's not above average type of cinematography and scripting, but there's something deeper. And this was the thing that kind of caught me about this film. Was afterwards I was thinking about it. I was like, you know, craft-wise, it's a pretty average type of film, but in terms of the underlying message of the film and the power of this girl actor, Hush Puppy, that really carried the film, and the scenes just were, I just couldn't believe, I couldn't believe how funky the film was, and yet how well put together the film was at the same time. That they seem to be picking up the story properly and carrying it along, but in these insane sets of New Orleans in a kind of dystopic future. I mean, it's kind of hard to believe. They created this bayou that's flooded, and first you're in the non-flooded bayou. Okay, and then you're not in the bayou. I mean, then you're in a flooded bayou, and to me, it just flowed. It seemed real. It seemed like a documentary of this flooded area. Underneath this film, there's a very compelling portrait of New Orleans. I feel like it references Tom Sawyer in certain ways. It references it references real Katrina footage, like documentary footage. But at the same time, what it was to me was like Mad Max, realistic. It was a realistic Mad Max. It wasn't. There weren't any bad guys. There wasn't any extreme violence. There wasn't any. It wasn't. The tale wasn't told in this way where you have to like root for a certain team or something like that. It was a film that was very honest, very unique. I don't think anything's been anything like it. They throw in this very strange CGI thing at the end that I don't want to ruin, but a lot of people have been critical of it. I didn't think it was that bad. But anyway, it's a very amazing, it's definitely an amazing film. Everyone should see it. I've never seen anything quite like it. It takes kind of like that reality feeling of cinema to a sort of different phase, I would say. And I think we'll probably see other films like it in the future, but all I can say is please go see this film. It stuck with me. It's very moving and very powerful.
That is Out with Play, reviewing Beasts of the Southern Wild. We got to go. We're out of time. We'll see you next week for another episode of My Dinner with Gabe. We'll see you later. Zav will play, Gabe Van Handel. Thanks.
And then doors shine in some other patch of sky.